This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 228 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking all about volunteering experiences, and in particular volunteering usually for a longer stint of time. There's been a lot of bad press about volunteerism in the last few years and the kinds of volunteer trips where it's a money-making exercise and not for the right people. Maybe you help out, maybe you don't. It's, kind of the feel-good version. But in today's episode, I've got three guests who did what I think can largely be considered good volunteering. And we talk about it a little bit, especially with my first guest, Lindy Alexander. But we'll get to that in a second. My son actually asked me the other day to include more of my own stories. When he listens to my podcast, he complained. So I'm doing this for him. I have never done any long-term volunteering, but I nearly did. I was very keen. And it was back in my early 20s. I was working in academic roles. I was working in mathematics education research, of all things, because, of course, my first degree was in maths. And I was really desperate to leave Perth, and I was looking for all different kinds of ways to leave Western Australia for a longer period of time, just to see the world, really. But, the volunteering idea did attract me. And I actually was accepted for a government-sponsored youth ambassador program. But unfortunately, the projects never came to fruition. So for a while, I was getting set up to go to work in the Solomon Islands for 12 months, I think. And I would have been helping out with helping the maths education curriculum in, I want to say the university there. I'm not sure if it was a college or what. But anyway, that was, really exciting. The reasons have gone because it's decades ago now. I can't remember how that didn't work out. And then I had a similar project through this youth ambassador program nearly come together in Cambodia. And for other reasons that I can't quite remember, I was quite keen to go, and my boyfriend at the time was going to go as well. But and the organisation that were kind of organising the volunteers who would be there had said that we should be married if we were going to be there together. And we even were happy to do that because I think at the time both wanted to leave Perth for a while. But for whatever reason, that still didn't work out. So didn't get married and didn't go to Cambodia. But one day, probably when my son has graduated and I can, wander the world and not have to pay a mortgage, then I would love to do some longer term volunteer work somewhere. And certainly the ideas from today's episode, really make me think, it's if you find the right place and the right project, the right people, then it's a fabulous way to give back to the world because, like many of you, I certainly have had many privileges afforded to me in life, and I would like to be able to kind of, give back because of that. So anyway, my first guest today is Lindy Alexander, and we chatted about her experience in Uganda. After she qualified as a social worker, she decided to volunteer there, and she was in Uganda, in a remote village in Uganda, for 8 months.
I hadn't travelled that much, really. I'd spent nearly a year in Canada in my very early 20s, but I'd never had any kind of experience in the developing world. I'd completed my social work degree, and I think I was really aware after going through social work what a privileged position I had grown up in and had never really experienced any sort of hardship. And I wanted to be uncomfortable. I wanted to be really challenged. And so I just thought, what could be more challenging than going to a country that is totally unfamiliar? And they speak English in Uganda, but I don't know, I was really up for an adventure, I think. And I also think that I wanted to I wanted to put into practice some of those social work principles as well, of social justice and working with communities, and working really strongly with a local group of people to help them achieve their aims.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think a project like that where you're there for a longer stint of time sounds to me like it could be a really successful and, properly helpful kind of project. Do you think that you guys did good while you were there?
I think that's such a big question. I mean, I think it's really tricky. I don't know. I think we probably did some good, and I think probably just not being aware of our biases and our values and our beliefs probably did some harm too. One good thing I do think that we did, which wasn't planned, was that Nat and we realised how disempowered the women within the village were, and so we would just spend time sitting with them, and because they were often they were the workhorses really of the society. They would have their maize gardens, or they'd be harvesting bananas, or they'd be collecting the water or firewood. And so Nat and I just started having conversations with them about what it was like. Well, what was it like being a Ugandan woman in a very remote area? And they started telling us that they felt like they had no money, and if they did earn money, then that was kind of distributed to their husbands, that they didn't have power over that money. And so we started thinking of ways with them that we could help them earn their own income. And so, over the course of those 8 months, we worked with the women on income generating activities. So they ended up making, I don't know if you've seen them, but they're like paper necklaces that are then lacquered, and so they become beads. Mm-hmm. And so those women started to make those, and we found suppliers in shops, and for the first time they had an income.
That's really powerful. Yeah. Do you have any idea, so this was, a decade or so ago?
Yes, so long ago. Yeah.
Do you have any idea how that village has fared since?
Well, I think our contacts there, and the headmaster of the secondary school I'm still in touch with, and he has moved away, but he kind of keeps me up to date with what's happening. And I think for a good few years that women's group was really strong and powerful, and then people moved away and kind of the group disbanded. But I think for a while that was a really strong bond for those women, and a strong source of income for them too.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's how wonderful to know that you did have some lasting impact. Because like you say, it's such a difficult thing. We want to help. It's so hard, no matter how well-intentioned you are, to figure out what is actually helpful, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even more so now, that kind of whole white saviour experience of going in, and I think probably I was probably one of the eldest volunteers in my mid-20s. There were people who were just out of school, and I think probably now people going into that experience would be briefed in a totally different way. And there's lots of conversation and narratives now, isn't there, around kind of volunteerism and that sort of thing. But, yeah, I'm really glad I did it, but I definitely have some hesitations about doing it again.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. I had no idea we were going to go down that road, but I'm trying to put together an episode on volunteerism, and I've got someone else, so that's why I wanted to steer you down that path, and that is perfect. So that's awesome. Wow. I had no idea you did that. That's such a cool experience. And for a sensible reason, that makes sense to think, okay, I have had this lovely life, but what is life like in other situations? So
yeah, and I think now too, having kids and telling my kids about those experiences and showing them photos of these kids in the village with, they had their traditional big bellies because they were malnourished, and 2 sets of clothes, they would have their good clothes to go to church or school in, and then they would literally be wearing, their clothes had more holes than fabric, and no shoes. And I talk to my kids about that all the time, and they're like, oh, we know, Mum, Ugandan kids. But I think, gosh, my kids are so privileged, and it's very easy, especially where we live in this in this regional country town where pretty much everyone's white, it's very easy to assume that everybody else in the world is like you when they're not.
Yeah. But your kids will grow up knowing from those stories, and it's so much more meaningful when it's their mum who did that and they have photos. It's not just something they see on TV or read about in a textbook. So, yeah.
I hope so.
Oh, I'm sure it makes a huge difference, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
So we're actually staying in Africa now with my next guest, who is Julia Salnicki. And she's a zoologist who has spent like many, many years working on various volunteer research projects. And I chatted to her for ages. She had so many fascinating stories. And actually, I didn't have space in this podcast to include all of it. But I wanted to let you know that if you are a Patreon supporter, then I have about a 10-minute extra part from Julia and my chat talking about how she worked with Dr. Greg Rasmussen in Zimbabwe on a small painted dog research project. And it's just a fascinating story. So if you're curious about that, you can become a Patreon supporter at notaballerina.com/support, and then you'll have access to that and various other extras as well. But for this episode, I talked to her about two projects she worked on for years in Africa and how it worked with volunteers and so on. Lots of interesting stuff. And to start off, I asked Julia about how she initially found her first volunteer work working with the painted dogs.
I was on safari in Zimbabwe, and we were out in a safari vehicle in Wangi National Park, and we came across Greg Rasmussen in one of his vehicles and sort of made the contact there, and we got chatting, and he's a very chatty person, and he loves to talk and tell visitors about the dogs, because mostly what people know is extremely negative. So he started talking, and he said, if you're interested, here's a little brochure. And so I took the brochure, and then I got home to Australia, and I thought, yeah, that's something I really want to try and do. So I contacted him, and he said, I don't pay you. You have to pay everything. You have to supply your own food. We have a house here in the bush. It's fairly primitive. It's you have to be able to put up with that. It's going to be a difficult life, but of course you will have the benefit of coming out into the national park at any time of the day or night, because we have special privilege to go in there. Right. And not only are you going to see painted dogs, but you're going to see everything else that's there as well. And so I said yes, and I paid my own fare over there and landed, and he met me and took me to the painted dog house, which I found out about 3 years later had actually been condemned by national parks.
That was quite primitive.
I think the roof was about to disappear, but
But it housed you okay.
Nevertheless, we had a boiler that we could fire up, put wood on and make a fire and get hot water. Mm-hmm. We did have intermittent electricity. We didn't have beds to begin with, so we actually had to make our own beds. And I'm thinking, how are we going to do this? So we managed, I can't remember where we scavenged mattresses from, but we got mattresses, and I thought, no, I don't like sleeping on the floor. I want to be above that. So we, again, rummaged around and went into the main camp area, and there was a garage there, and I said, it was one of those sort of, moments. Mm-hmm. And I thought, tyres. So we got 4 tyres for each bed and a big flat piece of board, put the board on the tyres and put the mattress on top of that. And I lived on that for about 3 years. I kid you not. It's extremely comfortable. Yeah. But we had lots of wonderful people who wanted to support us and help us. And if they came up from Bulawayo, which was about 3 hours drive away, that was our closest shop, pretty much. Wow. We'd say, what can we bring? And we'd say, please bring us some food.
Something new.
Something that will last, like pumpkin and potatoes and the cabbage and things like that we couldn't get sort of locally. Mm-hmm. But it's not an easy life being a volunteer. don't expect to be paid, and expect to pay most of the time on volunteering options. There are some good sites online that you can go to, and in fact I ran my own volunteer program in the next project I was on, because I was running my own project next time in the same national park with where I was for 5 years with the spotted hyena, but doing research. But then I ran it myself, and I ran it quite differently to Greg. I actually put it online, built a website, put it online, did ask volunteers to pay, but the money that they paid was then distributed 3 ways. Because I used to teach for a day a week at the local school there, I used to give a third to the school because they literally had nothing.
Oh, wow.
We used to just go and buy blackboard paint for them, and chalk and paper and books and pencils and things. They just had
the real
nothing.
basics, yeah.
The real basics, yeah. And then the second third went to the national parks itself, particularly to the trackers and the guides that used to help me. And if they needed mosquito nets, or they needed binoculars or bird books or boots or whatever they needed, the volunteers would then bring them over, not the money. The
actual equipment or whatever.
Yeah.
Wow, cool.
And it was so nice, because then we would have like a little ceremony. We'd go to the school and hand everything over, and then we'd go to the national parks and hand everything over to the guys there. And they then, I think, saw the real benefit of having a researcher around, that, they were giving me their help, but I was also helping them.
It went both ways. Yeah, wow. And so tell me a bit more about the whole volunteer project there with the spotted hyenas. Like, how many volunteers would you have at once? What kind of things were they doing? How did that all work?
Okay, so because it was only me, I could only, and I had four-wheel drive, I could only really take maximum 2 people at a time. So that's what I would take. And then I also allocated certain months during the year, mostly during the winter months when it wasn't raining, to have volunteers. During the summer months, it gets just a bit too complicated. I also only had 1 bedroom, which had 2 beds in it. So again, it could be two girls or 2 guys or 1 person, whatever it was. And then they would pretty much do everything with me that I had to do. And if that was cleaning the vehicle because it was completely soaked in mud, then they had to clean the vehicle, and there's no such thing as a hose, and if we had to light the fire, then they've got to go and collect all the sticks. And if we were going out for the night, because obviously it was nocturnal with hyenas, then I'd say, right, okay, whose turn is it to pack all the meals? We have to take everything with us. We would then go out, and we'd probably leave at 4:00 in the afternoon, watch sunset from a waterhole somewhere, which was lovely for them to do, and see elephants coming down. And then we would start our tracking. And again, a bit like the dogs, we had radio collars on the hyenas. But everything I did, the only problem that I would say with volunteers and talking to other researchers, you do spend a lot of your time training them and trying to teach them what to do, because they've got to be extremely accurate if you're going to use their data. And a lot of the time, it's almost impossible to tell a male from a female, and a new person not having worked in that line before would never be able to do that, particularly spotted hyenas. So a lot of the time their data was totally unreliable. So I didn't often get them to do that. It would be more things on the periphery that helped me collect the data. Like, I might be working at night, obviously with hyenas, and I might need someone to hold a spotlight. I used to use a spotlight with a red filter so that it didn't disturb any of the wildlife. And I'd say, right, okay, you hold the spotlight. I'm going to be recording what's going down, and I'm going to be talking into the video recorders, explaining what's happening, so I've got the data for later. Or, here's the book, write down 6 females, 2 males, something like that. Yeah. But I never had anybody who had any problem with doing anything I suggested. They all just came with totally the right attitude, mucked in, did it all. And it was a little tiny house in the bush. There was nothing in the way of luxuries out there, I can tell you. But everybody got, I think, a huge amount out of it, particularly working with the school and with the guides. and doing that sort of thing as well. So, yeah, it was a win-win situation.
Oh, it sounds like a wonderful situation, and, such an interesting opportunity for people to be able to work. I mean, to me, it's what I would like to describe as proper volunteering. It's, it's pure, you're giving of your time. And yes, there's amazing benefits because you get to be out there in an amazing place and, doing this really fascinating kind of work as well. But you're not just assuming that, it's not like some of the volunteer programs that get set up these days that are, more a money-making affair.
Exactly. And I believe there are a few of those, yes.
Yeah. I found it so interesting to hear not just about Julia's own experience as a volunteer, but also in terms of managing volunteers and the expectations and rewards and all of that. Really fascinating stuff. Julia now works as a guide also with the Classic Safari Company, and I think I would absolutely love to be on a trip with her because her knowledge is just so deep and she has so many great stories. My final guest today is Patti Lefkos, and we talked about some volunteer experience she has had in Nepal and certainly about a number of lessons she learnt from her volunteering there.
So I was a teacher and principal for 37 years. That doesn't mean I can be a teacher anywhere in the world. So I started, my husband and I went for 3 months trekking in Nepal in 2011 and did the major treks and things. And then he had a health issue. We came home. We got air evac'd out to Kathmandu. We came home, but we kind of didn't finish the trip. So in 2014, I wanted to go back. He ruptured his Achilles tendon, so he could not go. And I thought, my sister was ill. One of my best friends was ill. I thought, if I don't go now, I was 67. I thought, if I don't go now, I might not go at all. And so I went on my own solo trip. And one of the things that we had missed doing was going to our guide's village. We'd spent 3 months with the same guide and porter. We really wanted to go to their village and teach the kids, have a chance to volunteer and help. So there I was, 2014, a few years later, by myself, with my guide, going from Kathmandu out to this tiny village, 7 hours northwest in Gorkha province, and it's called Ratmate village, totally off the grid. You go 7 hours over really increasingly bumpy roads and then a 2-hour trek up the hill to get to this little village with this tiny school of, there were 155 kids, grade K to 6. And I had a duffel bag full of lessons I'd prepared and all kinds of school supplies. And I thought I really knew what I was doing. However, it didn't turn out quite that way. I learned a lot of lessons. The first one was never rely on electricity. I thought, I taught French as a second language. Teaching English as a second language would be great with songs. And so I thought I bought a boombox in Kathmandu. I had some CDs of songs. It was all ready. Well, you don't rely on electricity ever anywhere in Nepal, but certainly not in a small village. So that was the first thing. And then I thought, okay, we've got batteries for the boombox. That'll be fine. No, cheap batteries and cheap boomboxes do not work.
Oh, no.
And so I had to rely on my own voice, and I hadn't taught songs for a long time. I had practiced a bit before I went. So, I was okay. I got through it. Also, when you go into that kind of school, don't expect it to look like North America. It was small cement rooms. Nothing sticks on the wall because of humidity. You go into a classroom and think, there should be maps and charts and kids' work and everything. No, because the masking tape does not stick. And then the whiteboards are a total disaster. They're all eaten and pockmarked and everything. So not only do you need to take your own dry erase markers, you need to take, we actually paid for new whiteboards for every room in the school. I'd done fundraising before I left. So that was another thing, totally unexpected. And really, I took a lot of stickers. Kids in Canada love stickers in their work. Well, it was just too much for those kids. They went ballistic.
Oh, wow.
If you gave them a sticker in class, they would take it, peel it off, put it on another page, and say, I didn't get one, miss. Very smart kids.
Oh, no.
So I had to learn. I would go home. go back to my tent, my little dining tent, where I would eat and do my marking and planning and stuff. And then I would go over to the kids' work at night and put the stickers on. Still, they tried that, but I got smart. And then don't expect them to even have a pencil. They have tiny little pencils. One eraser in the grade 2 class of 30 kids. And this girl used it as a friendship tool. So it was quite a disaster. We did go and get new erasers, but those are the things that you just expect will be there. And I thought I'd taken everything I needed, and I didn't. And they don't have any library books. They have just their little workbooks, and that's it. And I must say, this was a school that was better than many. It had a classroom for each grade. It was very largely supported by the Wurunga Rotary Club of Sydney. They put a lot of money into it. It was really a good building by their standards. But still, it was such a disaster.
Wow.
The other thing is to really find early on, this is crucial, a shop that you can walk to, and there aren't many shops in this remote area, that has refrigeration. Because if they do, they're a source of Everest or Gorka beer, and you're really going to need one at the end of the day.
That's a very good tip.
At the end of the day, Raj, my guide, who had been the same guide from before, he and I would walk down the hill 15 minutes to this one little shop, and they sold erasers, pencils, and beer. And we would go there and kind of debrief the day, and he was amazing. His English is very good, so he became a classroom assistant instead of a guide. And I kept him in that classroom as much as I could. And so to find a guide that is willing to hang out with you, be your classroom assistant, share the beer, share the crying, share the, be forgiving of my foolishness, and also to kind of explain the system to me. So I got to know a little bit more what I could have been doing.
Some insider knowledge.
Raj was very gentle. He didn't, he waited till I asked, but that really helped. And it made the trip really wonderful, because by the time I started chatting a little bit with the teachers more and understanding what they went through, it turned out to be a fabulous experience. And I'm still in touch with some of those teachers too.
Another really interesting volunteer experience. And I have to say, I love Patti's tip about the beer. Sounds very sensible. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to episode 228 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast, all about volunteering experiences. A big shout out to my guests. I started off chatting with Lindy Alexander of the Freelancers Year, and you can find her advice for freelance writers and how they can earn well from their writing at thefreelancersyear.com. I then chatted with Julia Salnicki from the Classic Safari Company, and you can find more about what they're up to at classicsafaricompany.com.au. And lastly, I chatted with Patti Lefkos. You can find more about her at her website, pattishaleslefkos.com, including her book, which is Nepal One Day at a Time, about teaching trekking and building a school in remote Nepal. I also have a previous episode a while back, 2 years ago nearly, about volunteering, some really interesting experiences there. It's episode 145, so just look for it in your podcast app, or you can see the show notes for that at notaballerina.com/145. Don't forget that there are some extra bits to listen to on the Patreon page. So if you're curious about that, you can look at notaballerina.com/support because, for example, from today, I have an extra extract from my interview with Julia Salnicki, which was just really fascinating. I couldn't bear to leave it on the cutting room floor. It's too good. The show notes for this episode are at notaballerina.com/228. And don't forget to come and join the Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook, or there's a link in the show notes as well. I'd love to hear if anyone listening has had a really good and valuable volunteer experience when they travel. So do let me know. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.